Dr. Zaleh, Dr. Souleymane Ndao, Dr. Touré, and a PhD student, Diop. Would like to thank WARC and especially Professor Sam and his staff for always welcoming SASA. SASA is the Senegalese American Studies Association, which was created in 2014. And since then, it has been sponsored by WARC. Most of the activities of SASA have taken place here, especially in this very room. So today, again, we'd like to thank WARC, Mr. Sen, and his dedicated staff for always giving us the opportunity to do something within the Black History Month. And I would like to introduce a friend, somebody I shared a panel exactly 2 years ago, that was in February 2020 at Medi TV over there by VDN. And he's up here, Mamadou Chor from RTS. Mr. Chor is a graduate from the Department of English and especially in American Studies. And I remember that day we had to talk about the visit of Mike Pompeo, who had to visit Senegal in 2020, and we discussed, the reason why he came to Senegal and visited Africa, and he made very interesting contribution and raised very thoughtful questions. That's why I invited him 2 days ago to attend, so that he can also give his impressions and his ideas about the topic that the panelists are going to deal with. I'm really over the moon when I look at the names, because all the people that are going to present are former students of mine. So this is really a pleasure for me to see them, and I have no doubt whatsoever that they are going to pontificate. So without further ado, let's listen to them, and then we'll discuss after the presentation. The general topic is addressing contemporary challenges faced by the Black community, or Black communities in the United States of America. So let's welcome the three panelists, and let's get ready to listen to them. Thank you. Who's going first? It's not Ndao anymore.
No. Yes. We need one more chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Professor Mehdi, who was the chair of SASA for 6 years. And he was the one who kept the way for all of us. And he also supervised our PhD thesis, starting with mine. So thank you very much for the work that you've been doing and the support you've been providing us. Thank you. Also, on behalf of SASA, I would like also to thank once again WARC, the West African Research Center, for always providing this venue for us and for always providing us the technical support. Thank you very much. So without further ado, we are going to start with Dr. Souleymane Ndao, whose topic is April Rain and the Oscar So White campaign. Souleymane, can you hear us? He's going to present online. Dr. Souleymane Ndao, can you hear us?
Yes, of course, I can hear you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So you have about 10 minutes.
Can I start? I do not have a feedback, but can I start? It's okay.
Yes, you can start.
First of all, I would like to extend my warm gratitude to all the staff of WARC for allowing us to do this panel. Myself, I was supposed to be there, but I had an emergency in my office that could not allow me to be there. You know, when you have some responsibilities, sometimes you have to face emergency situations, and it is very also it is interesting to show that you are responsible. Thank you so much, dear Chairman. From you, I would like to address my warm gratitude also to Professor Ousmane Sène, a great support for our association since the beginning. It was 2014. I would like also to address my warm gratitude, my warm greetings to Professor Bindi for his support since the beginning also. We are celebrating Black History Month, and I noticed one topic that deserves to be addressed today, which is the movement called Oscar So White by April Rain. April Rain is a strategist advocating for social inclusion in motion arts and pictures in Hollywood, precisely. Oscar So White's movement by April Rain could be viewed as the modern movement for the emancipation of the motion arts and pictures. Hollywood plays an important role in modern society, as you may know, because the role that fiction production plays in modern day society has an impact which is so great on people's subconsciousness. And Hollywood particularly has a very good social, cultural, and political dimension as far as motion and arts production are concerned, because lots of information are produced, lots of shows are produced by movie actors and by cineasts, and represented in a movie, motion arts and pictures that deserve a particular attention in the way they treat minority groups, most particularly Black people. The way also they can twist reality into something that leads to other political agenda and causes, which is really interesting. To know who tells the story behind the camera. This is all the sense that should be given to April Rain's movement campaign, which was a campaign in response to the Academy Awards of 1887 Academic Awards in 2015. Ray worked as a campaign finance lawyer for 15 years before he resigned in 2014. And she resigned from FEC for violating the ACT Act. And she's currently the CEO of Recognition Ventures, where she advocates for representation of marginalized communities in arts and technology. This is a little bit is her background, and she created the Twitter hashtag Oscar So White on January the 15th, 2015, to call for attention to inequality in Hollywood and the lack of representation of people of color in the 87th Academy Awards nomination. And he said that she said that the movement was not intending to draw attention to how actors who performing well in movies, but it was to draw the attention on particular issues regarding who tells the stories behind the camera of most of the movies that are nominated in Hollywood Oscars. And particularly in 2016, her movement got a great dimension as everybody noticed that the overwhelming of nomination were white people. It was in the 8th Academy Awards. It was on January the 14th, 2016, and in response to very furor that sparks by the Oscar So White movement and hashtag, which was social networks like Twitter, the president of the Academy released a statement promising to take measures in order to diversify membership in the academic officials and to adopt a more inclusive, social inclusive approach regarding to that. And Ray said that the movement was it was about saying it was not about saying who's not or who should be nominated in the Oscars, but it's about opening a discussion on how decisions were made and who was cast and who tells the story behind the camera. And a very particular question she raised was, who tells the story that are behind the camera? What is the representation of colored people in the Academy of Motion Arts, in the Academy of Picture in Hollywood? And the question was really determined to knowing the ends of and the orientations, the flavor that is given to the story for artistic or political reason, for artistic and political purpose. It might be stories that is related to Black community, to other minorities, but that are told from a wide perspective, and that distorted the real truth behind all of that. So this was very important, an important movement that she launched to really revisit everything, most of the aspects of the academy, and her movement was successful at the end because the president of the academy, Cheryl Boone Isaacs, really took made important decisions on that behalf in order to accept as a membership in the academic official that was a good victory, if we could call it this way, changing how minority groups, particularly colored people, were represented in the arts academy, such as the motion art in Hollywood. I would like to conclude. I know that time is very crucial there. I would like to conclude very quickly saying that April Right campaign was very recent. It was very recent. It is in 2015. But the impact of her movement, of her campaign, is now visible in how the Oscars are treating, stories related to Black community, first of all, and how that story can impact the subconsciousness of most of the people that watch movies from Hollywood. As you may know, Hollywood plays an important role on American society, particularly, but worldwide also, because they are representing a story on politics, on religions, on other issues. And if the stories are told by those who lived them, that would be more relevant. But if the story are told by only white people, it really distorts the reality. And as you may know, between fiction and reality, sometimes there is waves of understanding, waves of thoughts that pass in between. So Oscar's So White movement by April Rain is a very good topic for this Black History Month, in order to revisit Black people's role in movie arts, in general in picture arts, and this is what I wanted to highlight with you, dear Chairman. And I would like to thank you for your attention, and to say that it is a topic that is in process for an article, and whatever comments and criticism and questions that may stem from you would be really warmly welcome. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Souleymane Ndao. So we are going to listen from. All right. What we are going to do is to listen to the different presenters first before opening the discussions and questions and taking questions. Okay. Now, second presenter will be Mr. Saliou Diop, whose topic is the rise of the foundation of Black Americans, FBA 1526, towards the end of the Black History Month in the U.S.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I think so. Thank you very much, dear Chair. Good afternoon, each and everyone. Thanks for coming. And it is always a great pleasure and an honor to be around. Thanks, SASA, for giving me that opportunity as a PhD student to come and present this topic, which is very interesting and a topical topic. I think it goes in the same logic that the one of Dr. Souleymane Ndao. And this topic is the rise of the foundational Black America, FBA, towards the end of the Black History Month in the U.S. A kind of maybe provocation in writing. maybe first I would like to address the foundational Black American. We have a movement, a grassroots movement in US created, or which was the American descendant of slavery, ADOS, calling themselves ADOS, African American Movement, ADOS, American descendant of slavery, claiming or demanding mostly two things. The first was, or is, because it's still going on, the reparation, kind of maybe changing the narrative from the 14 acres in the moon, 14 acres in the moon, to 20 trillion cash money dollars that they wanted to be given for reparation. This was the first element. The second one was, or is, the ethnic designation and protection. I mean, closing the gap between this ADOS, American descendant of slavery, and the white community. So these two elements were maybe put on the table by ADOS, the American descendant of slavery, mainly reparation and maybe closing the gap. So there's a brand new movement that I want to address, which is FBA, Foundational Black American, in which we have Tariq Nasheed, who is very really well known in Twitter, and other guys like Mel and others. And this Foundational Black American, they have very different perspective, or a very new perspective from the one of the others. And I remember in 2019, was here in SASA, we talked about the homecoming of African American and the African in the diaspora. And that homecoming, because we were talking about, it was in 2019, and we were celebrating the 400 years of deportation, 1619, 2019. But this movement, Foundational Black American, the FBA, they want to totally change the narrative, because they think that 1619 is not maybe be addressed, but they are rather talking about 1526 instead of 1619. 1526. Why? Because, according to them, 1526, you have a Spanish colonizer whose name was Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón, who arrived there, came into America, called at that time Tarana, the name that those Aboriginal would call themselves before we have that name, America. And they want to totally change the narrative, change the perspective. And they're saying that now, instead of talking about or thinking in terms of history, the starting point is 1619, let us rather take 1526. And now they want to, while after taking this decision, they want to, let us say, underline something, which is black, the concept of black itself. Black and African. Because right after saying that, they said that who is foundational Black American? I mean, all the Africans or African Americans are not foundational Black American. Is foundational Black American somebody who can trace back his lineage to 400 years back? Yeah, somebody who can prove that his parents and grandparents were not immigrant in the sense of, coming from Africa to America, but his parents or grandparents were among the slaves who, let us say, settled there, who were brought there, of course, before 1619. I mean, all those guys who are claiming 1619, they are not foundational Black American. They can call themselves African American or African or whatever, but they are not foundational Black American. And this has brought about a division, that a clash. And Tariq, who's leading the foundational Black American, created a space on Twitter. It people, more than 20,000 people, more than 8 hours of discussion between this foundational Black American, African American, immigrant, and that was very interesting. Clashing each other, but that was interesting to address that issue. Yeah. So this FBA movement, 1526, they created their flag with 3 stars, and the first one is what I was talking about. Represents the Black Aboriginal people of North America. I mean, if we read the book, if we take into account the book of Evan van Sertima, they came before Columbus. Evan van Sertima in that book talks about, African American, Aboriginal African who were there before Columbus arrived in America. So they, let us say, based their ideas on that book of Evan van Sertima. So we say that to be a FBA, you should be a Black Aboriginal people of North America, or Black explorers and traders who had contact with the Americas before Columbus. This also was raised by a Senegalese intellectual, Doyen Patajan, who was one of the students of Professor Saliou Diop, who taught here in Dakar, even at Harvard University, but who could not stay in Senegal because of President Senghor, who did not want him. He was among those people who would who get in exile, because of the former president. Doyen Patajan is a very, he's a great intellectual, Senegalese intellectual, who wrote also a book entitled Tarana ou l'Amérique précolombienne, un continent africain. And as they said, Tarana was the name that they would call themselves before they had this contact with Columbus and the others. Yeah. So this was the second element, to be FBA, to be considered FBA. First, as I said, to be Black Aboriginal people of North America. Second, to be Black, or among the Black explorers and traders who had contact with the Americas before Columbus. And third, to be the captives brought to the Western Hemisphere, but before 1619. So somebody who can trace back his lineage to the 3rd and the 4th generation, he can call himself FBA. All the others, they are immigrant, they are African. You can call yourself whatever you want, but you are not FBA. So this is the thesis. And of course, so many people did not agree, and that was very interesting, that brought about very interesting questions. Now the problematic I am raising, and I'm asking each and everyone, so that we can discuss it. The first thing is the black itself, as I said, the term black itself, because they say Africa, or being an African, yeah, that's geography. Africa is geography, but black is experience. So all those Africans who are coming in US, according to FBA, of course, coming in US, immigrants, they are not black. They are just African, because black is experience. You should go through some hardships like slavery or whatever, and face it, face the music, and come up with something like, a victory between black. So they make the difference between black and American. This is a question I'm now asking to myself and to each and everyone, so that we can, what do we think of it, and so that we can discuss. The second thing, they say we don't want to be, we want to name ourselves. We always take into account the importance of naming, unnaming, and even not naming, that we had the chance to be introduced to, thanks to our Professor Louis Mendy and all those professors from the English department, while studying Caribbean literature. Of course, the notion of naming is very important, the notion of not naming and the notion of unnaming. So, and they were saying, so why wouldn't we name ourselves? American people, they are in the same situation. why aren't they called African Jamaican, but just Jamaican? So why will we call ourselves African American? This is also a question mark. This is, I think, a very interesting question that you might think of. This is the second problem, this point, as far as the problematic is concerned. And the third point is they're saying that African people who are coming here, they underestimate the work that we are doing, that we have done. Because the time we were trying to fight with maybe what was the name again? The painters, with the black painters, with those Tokliko migrants. The time we were here to fight after the Civil War, the Reconstruction period. The time we were here to fight with movement like Black Panthers and others. You guys did not come. And now everything is starting to be laid, to be good. You guys are coming, and you do not appreciate what we have been through. You do not appreciate our fight. And the notion of success is here very interesting, because what they are saying is that African immigrants, they come here and they become successful. They call themselves Nigerian or Ethiopian. Hey, I made it. Yeah. And they are very proud to say, I'm Nigerian or I'm Ethiopian. But if they fail, they are just black. So we don't want to do that. FBA, of course, according to FBA, this is how this is what they think. Yeah. So the last point is the no reciprocity. For example, they're saying that African immigrant who can come here and benefit from all this atmosphere, wealth, school, and all those stuff, land, housing, and everything. We do not feel this reciprocity, because if we try to go back to Africa with the notion of homecoming, we do not have land. We have problem to have even papers. We do not have land. We do not have the same privilege. So they do not feel this reciprocity. That's why they say, okay, we are foundational Black American, and somebody who can trace back his lineage to up to 500, 400 years can be considered FBA. If not, you can call yourself whatever you want, but you are not part again. Yeah. This is the problematic I wanted to raise, and now we are in the Black History Month. Professor Mendy said it. And this Black History Month, I think the aim was to get together all those stuff, all those different communities, whether African or African American. I think this is what we learned from Carter G. Woodson, who's considered maybe to be the father of the Black History Month. So now with this situation, the question I'm asking for maybe for the discussion after is this Black History Month still interesting to be celebrated? Is the question I'm asking to me and to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saliou Diop, today's PhD student in American Studies, for this very interesting and relevant presentation, and for also challenging us. And I'm sure this will bring about some interesting discussions. Now we are going to give the floor to Dr. Rokhaya Touré, whose topic is will deal with police brutality count and endemic scourge. Dr. Touré, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all my dear colleagues, dear panelists. I'm so delighted and so honored to be around this table. I would like also to acknowledge our distinguished guests, students who have made it here to attend this panel's discussion. We really appreciate your time, because we know that your schedule is too busy, but you chose to be here, so we really appreciate that, and we really thank you for that. So to now delve into my topic, as we are in the Black History Months, I would like also, well, before delving, just acknowledge also my dear Professor Mendy, and other professors like Professor Sen. Because if we are sitting here today, it is because we stand on the shoulders of giants, like himself, like Professor Mendy, Professor Sen, and all other professors. And we are indebted to them, and we will always be grateful because we know how far we have come from. We know. He knows what I'm talking about. So now to get into the gist of my presentation, it is, as a title, it is the police brutality, meaning police violence, and an endemic scourge. Why is it an endemic? Because it dates back since time immemorial. Since the slaves set foot in the US until now, violence is so rife, so rampant in the United States. Whatever the outcry, whatever the hullabaloo, whatever the uproar it may create, it is still the same. It's like a vicious circle. Every time, whatever movement is created, whatever association, violence is still there. Now, first of all, I would like to give the type of, what is the definition of brutality, what we call police brutality. How is it practiced, in fact? Police brutality can range from torture, beatings, and especially unlawful killing, even excessive use of force, even sometimes, let's say, choke strangles, all those kind of mistreatment that are pegged on black people. So this is the police brutality. But when, the question is, when are this police brutality put into practice? We usually see that brutality during demonstrations when black people, since they are really at the bottom of the ladder in the United States, suffering really, bearing the brunt of all the hardships in the US, whenever they rose up to claim their rights for equality, they are crushed, they are repressed by the police and in a very brutal way. We have seen it since even after slavery, during the Jim Crow law, there was some lynching, public lynching, even hanging of some black people. And up to the 50s, we have seen it with the killing of Emmett Till in a gruesome way. And after that, so many cases are really galore in the United States. There's so many cases, every generation with its horrible toll. And during those demonstrations, especially, I have to tell you one story. I was dragged to follow American Studies because of the police brutality I saw. Because when I was in high school, especially when I was in 12th grade, I used to go to the American Cultural Center to watch American movies on the civil rights movement. And in those days, it was Professor Shenjian who was commenting those movies. And I was so shocked, so appalled, so really flabbergasted by that violence I saw, and that has triggered my interest in American studies. I wanted to know why black Americans are suffering such toll in the US. Why are they suffering so? They are treated like, not even inhumane, but like objects, not even, animals are even better off than black people in the US. Even just you see peaceful black demonstrating unarmed in a non-violent way, and there were dogs were used against them, clubs, even live bullets, whatever means you may imagine were used against them. So this has triggered my curiosity. This has pushed me towards American studies. And once I got into it, now all this violence that we have been seeing during those Bloody Sundays and all those things, it has also pushed me to go to the US, and I went to Alabama, especially. I went to Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee, because all those historical places I wanted to discover. That is really so proud of the suffering of black people, where everything started during the civil rights movement, because I was so shocked. But up to now, even the last one now, even let's say since 2013, with the killing of Trayvon Martin, who was a young black, unarmed, and by police who are this is just on basis of racial profiling. Just being a young black, wearing a hood, just a suit, or they can label you according to the music you listen to, according to the video you watch, they could label you and say you are a suspected drug dealer or a gang member, and then they just shoot you. Even though the police, when they stop the black for identification, they put them on the ground. They lay them on the ground, which is, we'll never see with a white man. This is just the undertones of racial profiling, of racism, deep-seated, entrenched racism that is still rife in the United States. So after Trayvon Martin, there was also which has sparked violent protests around the world. So that there were Eric Garners, there were Trayvon Martin, there were also Michael Brown, and the last one that made really worldwide, that went so viral was with George Floyd, with the Black Lives Matter. And what is now the worst part of it is that all those killers are never charged, they are never prosecuted, they are never found guilty. Or even though they attempt a kind of mock, let's say, prosecution, at the end of the day, they are discharged, meaning they are found not guilty. Or at least they are in custody for 2 days, just over a weekend, and they are set free. So nobody is held to account. This is an unbelievable, let's say, injustice. We cannot even, despicable injustice. And not only men are killed, but women as well are killed. And the latest one who was killed was Amir Rock, the 22 young boy who was found in his apartment. And the police said he has a no-knock warrant, so he just broke into his apartment and shot him. And so far, people are claiming justice, but it's not yet served. So, and then being the country of justice, so-called justice, so there are still questions we need to ask. So all these are really situations of blacks being ill-treated, this racial profiling, and also for very trivial reasons as well, killed just for petty things. And according also to some statistics, black represents 13% of the population, but they are 24%. They represent 24% of the murders, meaning the highest level of people who are killed in the US, which is too much. And nobody is held to account. And this is reflected even in literature, in so many books, like the one of Toni Cade Bambara, in her book, Those Bones Are Not My Child, which really reflects those killing, those mass murder of blacks, just who are abducted and killed, who disappeared in a day, just in one day. So all this requires it's just a call on us to really question and never lay down our arms, when I say arms, I mean not weapons. Let's say, we should not sit back and fold our arms. This is not only an issue for the black community, but it's an international community issue. Because police brutality is seen everywhere, but especially in the US, it is worse in that case. Now, if there are now, to come to my last part, possible solutions, of course, there are some laws, but let us remind that in the United States, 9 states have no laws against lethal use of force. They have no laws. So what could be a possible solution? It is to make sure that all cities have stringent laws on the use of force, and also make anybody who's involved in any murder account, so that those deaths are not vain loss. And then also, not only on law, of course, making sure that even the prosecution take place, that justice is rendered. But there is a question I would like to put on the table, and which makes me so skeptical. It is, will there ever be justice as long as racism, there are still racial undertones in the US? That's the question I put on the table, and I hope that you'll find the answers and the solutions to this endemic scourge in the United States. Thank you again for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Touré, for this very informative and poignant presentation on the situation of the plight, let's say, for the government of black people in the US. Now we are going to give the floor to Dr. Camille Dali, whose topic addresses the lesson beyond where to go from here, community or chaos. Dr. Dali, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much for giving me the floor. It's always a pleasure to be around at WARC and present in the name of SASA. Thank you, Professor Mendy, for this brilliant idea for joining us together. Thank you, Dr. Blaijai, for managing now SASA, and all those who are here today to celebrate with us. Because it is a time where we reflect on African, I would say, not black, but African, as African people. We say Black History Month, but you know, because the wording, as Saliou mentioned a while ago, is very important. It depends on how we identify ourselves. When we are in the States or in the Caribbean or in India, and you say, okay, like, you know, I'm Asian or I'm Caribbean, or you are in Europe and you say I'm European. If you don't identify yourself as African, then that would be problematic. Because actually, we are not minorities, we are majority. But by being brainwashed for so long, for centuries I would say, we come to believe that we are minorities, but that's not the truth. So that's why Pan-Africanism is very important. When we start to join hand in hand and think that we are one, and then that's when we're going to start to be powerful. So my topic discusses the lesson beyond where do we go from here, community or chaos or community, okay? So that's an inspiration from a book by Dr. Martin Luther King. So I wanted to question what has changed so far since the civil rights movement. Last time we were having a movie, the film, The Hate You Give, and I was really blown away by the film, and I was saying, wow, this is, you know, I don't like films, but those are those great films. When you know watch them, you are very broken-hearted, you know, or just yeah, that's completely changed, you know, the way you behave. So what has changed so far? We had the Bloody Sunday, we had the Black Power movement in the United States, the civil rights movement, and then after we had the Black Arts movement, where you have those giant figures in art, people like Amiri Baraka, whose son is the current mayor of Newark, New Jersey. And now we're still living the same situation in the United States. So maybe I just gonna ask if you feel free, one in the audience to tell me why. Why we still, you know, it's a cycle, we're still, you know, living, why? Do you have any idea? Okay?
It's not a cycle, it's a continuation.
Okay, it is a continuation.
So when people see that something is not working, right? Now you can't have segregation be legal. So you have to find a new way to make what you want happen without people catching on. And then each time people catch on, they're going to change it into something different that looks like progress so that people aren't as angry. And so people get angry and then they change it again. And so it's continually trying to catch up to what's happening as opposed to it being a cycle. Because we don't start over, we keep going.
Okay, thank you so much for this brilliant contribution. Someone else? Okay, I might continue. So actually, everything, you know, has meaning or explanation. Everything started when race was was a social construct, because there is no such thing as race. But when you divide people and tell them, okay, you are white, you are black, you are this, and then you start to differentiate them. And that's how you can control them, like, you know, the divide and conquer strategy. So at some point in world history, we had slavery, and then we had slavery, and then after we had, you know, scholars, especially in Germany, when they were trying to convince people that we are different, and then someone like Carl von Linné, who was kind of who was putting a hierarchy regarding species, just like Darwin did, but Darwin was not, you know, didn't went that far compared to Carl von Linné. And then we have, you know, philosophers like Hegel, you know, stressing also, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, all those people, so praising whiteness. And that's what we, you know, we end up having questions of fluidity, questions of whiteness, determining who is yellow, who is black. So, and what main important question? The question of money, capitalism. When we started, you know, with capitalism, that's how we started with notion what Dr. Martin Luther King was calling the giant triplets. Because of capitalism, question or notions of race was brought, and then because of we had to divide people, we needed militarism, weapons. And that's why my sister Rokhaya, Dr. Rokhaya Touré, was mentioning police brutality in the United States. How can we understand, you know, those kind of issues when unarmed black men are killed in broad daylight and nothing will happen? The question of police accountability. As long as we don't have police accountability, we'll always, you know, we'll have that continuing situation. It doesn't make sense at all. Imagine when because George Floyd, we had a grand jury, because in the United States it's very particular. It's different from, like, you know, it's not like what we have in Senegal. You have a prosecutor, and then you have the judge. So they end up saying, okay, this is the sentence. But in the States, we have grand jury. So usually those juries are mainly white and male who are part of them. So they can decide whatever they want. So jury service is very important. So community of chaos. We had the, because all is connected to power. Who controls power? Because we had, right after the Civil War, when African Americans, you know, were freed, we had the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment and then the 15th Amendments. So those were the Reconstruction Amendments. And right after we had we had Jim Crow laws, you know, repelling all those gains that were made possible by the U.S. Constitution. And that's why we sometimes say that the 13th Amendment itself is just a redesigning of slavery, actually. Because in the United States, there is no more slavery. But once, you know, you tag it and say, okay, you're now a criminal or you're a Turk, you could be jailed. And when you jail, you lose your voting rights. That's how the system functions. And in several states, even in the United States, you cannot even, you know, open a business. That's what we call violent disenfranchisement. You could no longer vote for life. Because vote means change. When you're voting, it's because, you know, you're participating in the change. So if you're no longer able to participate in change, so you become like you know, what was refused to your grandfather during the old Jim Crow times. That's how the system functioned, actually. And that's why we still have the prison industrial complex, where people are, you know, earning a lot of money, where people can work for nothing, you know, or they pay $1 a day, because, and even when we had the COVID outbreak in a city like in New Orleans, Louisiana, they were taking inmates, like prisoners, so they can work as garbage collectors. Imagine that. You're risking your life, where everyone was kind of thinking about, you know, how they can get away with COVID, And they say, okay. And those people that are mainly like me, they are black, they are African. So, yes. When it comes now, those were mainly about the legal perspective. When it comes now to the question of housing, we had the FHA, that was the Federal Housing Administration. That was right in the 1940s. The FHA gave loans access to a lot of newcomers, but they were not black people, they were not Asian, they were mainly Europeans. So that's how they ended up having, mortgages. They had houses. At the same time, you're denying it to black people. And then you say, oh, these people, they are lazy, they don't want to work, they are here drinking alcohol, or they're good for nothing. So that's how the system functions. And then that's how we ended up having questions of segregation, redlining, gerrymandering, to always control people, especially black people. Because there is a main concern of fear. They think that what they have been doing to black people for centuries, if things change, there would be a kind of revenge. But I don't think that, it's not part of our nature, to avenge. But they make people think that. And that's why we're still facing hard times, especially in the south of the United States, with the question of CRTs, critical race theory. In a lot of states, they don't want people to be awakened by books by, let's say, Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. They don't want people to read, for example, books by, let's say, Abraham X. Kendi or Ta-Nehisi Coates. They don't like those kind of books because a lot of people have been awakened once they were in contact with those kind of books or scholars, and they don't want that. So because history is actually to repeat itself when it's not learned. So the only way we can break the cycle is by letting people understand history. Because if you don't know history, history is bound to repeat itself. So yes, that's what I wanted to share with you. And there is also the idea of the big picture for all African people around the world, whether they are in the United States, in the Caribbean, in Asia, wherever you are, to identify yourself as black, as African. Also, the first time you start identifying yourself as African, you're making a giant step in reconnecting, yourself to Africa. And because the question of identity is very important. That's the only way Africa could become, like what Egypt was, back then, to be powerful scientifically, militarily, economically. And that day, whenever they kill an African in the United States, African people can have one voice and say, oh, we're condemning this. But still, so far, we're not doing it. They killed George Floyd in the United States. No African president, voiced it himself. All of them muted. And that's when they started, listening from China and others. That's, that's where the African Union just condemned it. But, it's sad. But with a new wave of Pan-Africanism rising, I think that, things are going to change by focusing mainly on education. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samir Mahzadeh. So now we are going to open the floor for the public. I think we are going to take a set of 5 interventions, these are comments or questions, and you specify whom is, the questions are destined to. So who would like to intervene?
Let's break the ice by giving the floor to our 2 guests.
All right.
So they're going to break the ice.
Yes.
And the young people will be able to jump.
Okay, let's start with them. All right, so Mr. Chong and.
Oh, Mr. An.
Yes.
General.
All right, so you have.
So this one going to when he asked questions, what has changed? I think that we have 3 tiers to change things in the United States. The first one is street demonstration. I think Martin Luther King had that. The second one is economy. Hello?
Yes.
Economy can drive equality. Because we're talking about black economy. If you see the Chinese, they have a big solidarity and Chinese internal economy, and they can change things. But black have no solidarity. And the last one is what you said, when George Floyd was killed, no African raised up in protest. Why? Because maybe George Floyd is not seen as an African American, but as a black American. And I like to remember what the strategy of Obama. When he wanted to rise to power, he emphasized his African roots. He wrote a book on his father. Why? Because he knew that if he say that he's a black American, he'll be in the problem of white to black. So he bring his African roots. I think so. Black Americans should really work on their African roots, connect with Africa if they want to change something in the continental United States. Thank you very much.
All right.
And thank you for giving me the floor. I'll just come back to the election of President Obama when he spoke away. But there were at the time a little enthusiasm, and I was covering the event at the American Cultural Center, and there were a lot of questions coming from my colleagues, journalists, and other people, thinking that seeing a black person elected to such a high function as President of the United States was meaning at the time maybe the end of all these hardships the different analysts was mentioning. But when you look at after President Obama finished his presidency, what happened and all these hard events, George Floyd, and haphazardly the lady was talking about how the police brutality, and I don't know if you watching the news in Georgia with this hate crime. So the federal court charged all these three white people who assassinated Harvard on racial basis. So it's come to the conclusion that the election of Obama and his presidency maybe for some people, when you look at all these things happening, starting happening to the black community in general, have not maybe better the situation of the black people in the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lai and Lord General Lai and Mr. George. All right. Okay. So I'm going first to take the names of so Jenna, right? Janai. Okay.
So
Yes.
Maybe I should wait because it's not necessarily a question. It's more a comment.
Okay. So we have the first intervention will be from Fatima, who is online, raising her hand, and then you'll be the next, and then Raj. And yes, Musa Bayan. And the fifth one, yes, Daud. Alright, so first we are going to listen to Fatima who is online. So Fatima, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you properly. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure, we can hear you.
Hello everyone. Good afternoon, Mr. Jai. It's a pleasure to see you guys, even if it's online, and to be able to take part in this very brilliant presentation. And I always want to say hello to my teacher, a very good friend of me, and a role model, Mr. Touré. So, and to all of the guests who are present in this presentation. So what I wanted to say is more, let's say a contribution more than a question, because at some point somebody was talking about how, and the question is how, why are we still facing this police brutality? Why do we always have this at this point? Why are we having this to ask such questions? Because it's very unacceptable at this time. So I think that the question is a threat. I think when a person is not doing anything wrong, at least in art, just like Mr. Gray said, is still being attacked from another source, it's a threat. And I think somehow black people making so many decisions, and that the more focus on people, the stronger the threat is. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you again so very much. And yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Fatima. Unfortunately, we had some technical issues, so we couldn't hear you very well, especially there. So now, yes?
Elle utilise son téléphone, son iPhone, elle parle avec son iPhone.
Voilà, c'est ça. D'accord. Oui, c'est bon. Elle a fini, elle a terminé. All right, so Janai, now you.
No, she would like to be,
last one, okay.
Someone else.
Okay, Elash. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Thank you. Yes, thank you. First of all, my name is El Haji. I am here to assist this panel. So thank you for all of you intervenant for this panel. But for the brother who was talking about the problem of black Americans in the US, I will go back to refer to Bob Marley, what he was saying. They don't want to see us live together. All they want us to see us is keep on fussing and fighting. Now, the problem of the black, for example, if you know, like you are from here, Africa, and you go to the US, so the brothers over there, when they look at you, yes, because you have not been through many difficulties. You just wake up one day, take a plane, and you just come in US. So to be very acceptable, it's going to be hard sometimes to look at you just like you are a true black. Because they just wake up one morning and they just see you. You have not been through much painful. You have not been suffering all kind of stuff. That's my thing, that's my opinion. And Dr. Rokhaya about police brutality, you know the problem sometimes is very difficult because the police people sometimes they don't understand. Say for example, if people are doing rights, you have to also give them chance so they express themselves. But the problem is you always see the police people, they just attacking people. Like yesterday at the stadium, we have a new stadium in Senegal. So yesterday was the inauguration day. The stadium contained like 50,000 people. But imagine yesterday, there was more than 80,000 people in the stadium. So not all of them have to be entered. And the people, they feel pain because it's hard. You come all the way from your house and you've been seeing all TVs, they're talking about the stadium and you didn't enter. Now what happened is the police people, they are sending grenades. You see, always brutality. So that's very difficult. Yeah. But thank you, I really appreciate and I'm learning a lot of things about this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kalash. Now, Mustafa.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I have to say to address my warm regards to our Professor Souleyman Ndao for the great support that he has been for us for 2 years now, or 3 years. Because I'm still a PhD student like Saliou at the English department. We are always under his supervision. And after that, I will really congratulate SASA once more to be able to organize that kind of meetings to as the opportunity, the space to get together and then exchange over some very interesting issues. So after that, so I'm gonna congratulate all the panelists, especially my brother Saliou. So great job. And so, but I have some more questions for you. But before that, I want to tackle first of all Dr. Zale and Dr. Souleymane Ndao, because you have one aspect in common, because Dr. Souleymane Ndao talked a lot about who is sorry, please. What is it again? Yes, who tells the story of the movies nominated mostly in Hollywood and something like this. And you talked about the movie, like The Head You Give. And if you watching this kind of movie, you kind of feeling like you are heartbroken or something like this. So don't you think that the one who is behind that movie, isn't it the kind of feelings that he want to transfer to you? Or how do you think that we should receive that best? And so the second question that I wanted to address is to my brother Saliou, who talked about being black and African, because I think this kind of concepts, they're really dividing us now. Because I don't think that you have to be through hard times to be, to be regarded as a black or an American, because I think we have really the tendency not to go through those kind of concept or slogans to make something for our community. And that guy said it earlier, because there is no solidarity in the black Aqua community, and this is a fact. And how do you think that we should address that? Do you think that those kind of new concepts that we are raising, do you think that they are helping? Do you think, in front of the officers, the races and everything, do you think that these are like some kind of effective solutions for us to get together and fight together the enemy? What do you think about that? This is my question, and thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, Musa, and we have Daud behind you.
Assalamu alaikum. I have a question for Saliou. This is just like your question, and I kind of turn it back to you. But with a shortage population, so this is about black, as a concept. I don't like concept because this is, kind of building some structure and separation between people, and this is going to create communities. And once you are black or African, and then between you, blacks and Africans are being built into many communities, you are going apart. You are not going together, but you are going apart. So, what I like to ask is, if African Americans think that they are legitimate to proclaim black, just because they went through slavery in America, do they think that slavery does not have brutal and negative aftermaths in Africa? That was my question.
All right. Thank you very much, Dawood. Chennai, do you want to make your comment now? Sorry? Yes, after her, yes. Okay, what's your name? Fatim. Fatim Doi. Yes.
Sorry, yes. I am not really in your culture American. I did not do study with American culture. Sociologist by training. I studied public health, so I have another thing about the situation. For me, the issue of racism is complex, and it's not only in the United States, even in Africa. So how do you consider, for example, the other one in Africa that treats black people as the same in the United States? Because in Mali, for example, or in Tunisia, there is even here white people that come from that Maghreb side, they treat us as the same, and they don't have consideration about black people. So the issue is really complex, and it's not only United States, but how black people represent and see black and educate even their children like that. It is a continuation. So how its form is complex and huge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fatim. Yes, can go on?
Can I just speak like this?
Yes.
I don't,
Yeah, sure.
I teach at home. I have to talk into a loud classroom. I wanted to wait because I feel like a lot of the things that I have to say are more answered than they are questions even to that. And I think, so it's really interesting for me to be here in this room and see everyone try to tackle the idea of being black. Because in Senegal, so the first time I came to Senegal was in 2013. And when I got here, I said to someone, oh, I'm black. And they were like, no, you're not. You are Matisse at best. That's what you are. Yeah. In the United States, race is not the same. You understand? Just because my skin is light, you can have light skin and still be black if your ancestors are black. So in the United States, I'm not considered white. I'm considered black. Yeah? There's like a couple of things, because with the foundational Black Americans, I don't agree with a lot of what they're saying. But I also disagree with the fact that everybody has to call themselves one thing in order to be one thing. Yeah? Because even in Senegal, everyone here is Senegalese, right? So we can all agree that, it would be the same. But even in Senegal, there are different ways of identifying yourself, right? One could be Fulani, one could be Serer, one could be this. And so the same concept applies. I think that people have to start changing their mind to really understand that when black people are talking about, being black, they think that there is, because I've observed and have been following this discourse, like even online, and there's a lot of infighting about who's to blame here. But the reality is that when I first came here in 2013, this is so interesting to me now, because when I first came here, even in 2013, the conversations were very different. People were like, the police are doing these things? Like, people didn't understand. In American schools, because we go to American schools, you understand? We're not taught that we are African. That's not something we're taught. All we're taught about Africa is that it's poor, you know, it's different than who we are, and that's that. Because all of our education is created in a white system, in a white country, for the benefit of white people and capitalism. And so there is a benefit in not teaching Black people that there is a global community that they belong to. I will say though, you know, that I think that there's no problem with there. For me, I take pride in saying, well, I'm Black. It's pride for me. That's a source of pride. You have these diaspora communities all over the place, but even if you look at somewhere like London, right? For the most part, if you go to someone there who's African, right? They're gonna be able to say, my mother came from here. My grandmother came from here. That's not the case with us. Because we're one of the few communities that had to forge their identity and what it means to be Black in a country where everyone else around us is white. We only make up 13%. Only 13. So I don't think that there is actually anything problematic about identifying myself as Black. It's just that all the other parts of the community, including our own, have to understand that that still comes back from a common lineage. That's the thing. That's all I want to say.
Thank you very much, Jenai, for your comment. All right, so reactions from the panelists. I think there is a question by Musa Bayan to Dr. Souleymane Ndao. That you want to start. Can you remind us of your question again, Musa? Okay.
Okay. Thank you for your brilliant comments. Dr. Musa Bajan, thank you for your question. Yeah, I was mentioning the hate you give, that film, because the message was very, very deep. Not only the setting or the actions, but the wording they used throughout the film. Because we had a father who was not only a father but a mentor, teaching, becoming actually I would say a behavioral science teacher, because he was teaching his kids how to behave when you have an encounter with the police. Don't move, don't do this, if they ask for your ID, this is where you have to put your, and I said, wow, at this age. But he wanted to to take care of his children. If he doesn't do that, they will be killed. And even that's why in the state they have a concept they call respectability, because this is how you should behave, to be respectful, don't do this, and it has a racial meaning, actually, or underpinnings. It started all the way, through slavery, when people were saying, yes, mom, yes, sir. And then imagine that boy, Khalid, he was killed by a brush. By the police officer, because, he had a brush. A brush you use it, to straighten up your hair. So, because of respectability, actually, he was killed. And the police would say, Apiti. U-P-P-I-T-Y, Apiti. Because he was uncompliant. And he would say, easily, I fear for my life. That's what they always say. I fear for my life. That's why he killed. And then even Common, the uncle of the girl, Star, at some point they were having a discussion, and come on as a police officer because the badge in the States, when you have a badge, whether you are black or white, you behave the same way. And Common he's a police officer, uncle of, his dear niece, telling her that, as a police officer, I will shoot. And then the girl said, because she was trained by her father, replying, saying, okay, imagine being in a white neighborhood, your suspect, being white, would you behave the same way? Would you shoot? And, and I said, wow. So that's how, yeah, that's actually the message. That's actually the message. So now when it comes to the question, who is African? I think the narrative is very important. Who should define us? Should we define ourselves, or we should let others define us? I think that was Peter Tosh saying that you are not an African because you were born in Africa. You are African because Africa is born in you. You're not an African because you were born in Africa. You're an African because Africa is born in you. So we have the African diaspora. You could be in Jamaica, the West Indies, the Caribbean, India, Brazil, the States. The first time, that's why I was mentioning that, the first time we all, think worldwide that we are one, we are African, that would be a giant step in starting, the way we think and changing, reversing the situation. Because it's done on purpose. It's done on purpose. Imagine those who came here, they took some of us and shipped them overseas to the States and telling them, your brothers and sisters over there, they sold you out. And they, that's how they're teaching you. They've been teaching you that for centuries. And then they're disconnecting you with Africa. So you are in the States, you believe that those, they are bad people. They sold over my parents. And then, but then they still come here. They're going to take their planes, come to Africa, enjoy, and go back home. You're still there. You're disconnected. They will continue to crush you home, and then that's how the system functions. Divide and conquer. So, and that's what Ghana did by the whole homecoming Sally was mentioning. That's, they're trying to reconnect. We have a lot of writers, people like Monificate Asante with his Afrocentric paradigm or idea. We have a lot of scholars now in the United States identifying themselves as African living in the United States. I had a friend of mine, and I consider a mentor, who died last year. I think he died last year, last April. Ronoko Rashidi, one of, he completely changed my, the way my perspective on the question of race and positionality, the question of identity, and that's, when I started seeing, whenever I see black people, African people, I would say, they are my brothers. Whether you are in West Papua, Guinea, whether you are from the Aboriginal in Australia, I always see them as African. So that's a fight, Shahan Tudor was leading. That's a fight Kwame Nkrumah was leading. That's a fight of Amilcar Cabral. That's a fight of all those giants. So that's my understanding. Thank you.
Right. I think Dr. Souleymane Ndao also is no longer there. Okay. Okay. So Saliou, I think you have two questions. One from Musa Badian and the other one from Daouda, right? Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. The first question may be related, asked by my brother Musa Badian. Being black, the difference maybe between being black and being African. Yes, according to the FBA, because I am somebody who really like, let us say, contradictory debates. That's why I was truly interested by that debate. And I said, let me just put it like that so that we can exchange. And I do not share the idea of being black and being African. That's their perspective that I understand. But I also think that we should respect the perspective of, or maybe have that culture of respecting the perspective of the others, even if we do not agree. And I think it was the main problem with Nigerian coming, Ethiopians coming, because they did not agree. Everybody wanted to say, hey, what you guys are saying is nonsense. No, you should listen to the others and see. And if we try to understand, maybe we can go deeper related to the question. What is, maybe my answer would be, what are the behaviors that we should have as African toward this African American, for example? I think there are two perspectives. As an African, wearing, for example, my flag, I like my brother, going to maybe France, because we have a particular relationship with France, with colonization and all those stuff. I can maybe show off, or with my flag, let them know that, hey, I am proud of my country, of where I am from. But I'm asking a question to myself and you. Is it the same perspective, the same behavior that we should have toward African Americans once in US? Why would we show off and say that we are proud of being from Senegal? If we truly believe that what gathers us is much more interesting than a country, this is the question. An African American, for example, reading Toni Morrison's Chasing Ghosts, for example, in Beloved, and the same thing that we can find in Fatou Diom's book, Selki Atan. My friend Alamin there is truly interesting, but he doesn't understand the word. Selki Atan, for example, of Fatou Diom, or La plus secrète mémoire de Mohamed Bougansar, Last Goncourt, addressing the same issue, and that once there, he does not feel that connection, because that chasing this spirit of the fact of chasing the spirit, we find it also in the Vodou, for example, in Benin, or even in Latin America. So all these, for me, literature is very powerful. Somebody who's reading as African American, from my perspective, and who's saying, oh, these are very interesting things that I learned from, for example, Toni Morrison, that I can find in other African books. It means that this link is here. And once African people are here, they are in their behaviors like kind of, dividing us. This is very problematic. I'm trying to understand it in the perspective of those FBA. For me, that's very, very, very interesting. I think we should let everybody claim if they want to define themselves as FBA or as whatever they want, to have that right to do it. And that we see from our perspective and from their perspective how we can get together. What can, really make us powerful. Because for me, FBA, I think the FBA is just a new way of looking for an answer. My brother, Dr. Zale talked about Pan-Africanism. Let us look at the history of Pan-Africanism. I was from America first. Let us update it here. I mean, his name again, Marcus Garvey, whether it is Marcus Garvey, as he was not a thinker, maybe, but he could get people together, Marcus Garvey, whether it is W.E.B. Du Bois, who, as a philosopher, really started thinking of it, putting content, whether it is Cheikh Anta Diop, whether it is Kwame Nkrumah, you have that link from there to here. Now, what has become Pan-Africanism? It is no longer an inclusive project. I am a Pan-Africanist and somebody who's in the movement. But in our way of thinking and getting people together, most of the time we forget the others. And we forget that that project did not come, was not born in the continent of Africa. So I think we both should change that our perspective or try to see how we can be much more inclusive in our perspective. That would be very very interesting. We are talking about Africa or black, but even the notion of Africa does not come from Africa. It comes from Ifriqiya. Ifriqiya was a community in Carthage, in Tunisia, the capital of Tunisia, Tunis. It is that part that was Ifriqiya. So it is the Roman, actually, when they came to conquer Carthage, who, get Ifriqiya from that community to the North Africa, and then from that to the whole continent. So changing the narrative, I think, would start with even the name, the naming Africa. That would be interesting, I think, to address things like that. Yeah, for me, this is what I think. I think we should let everybody define, put content in his identity, in his perspective, but I think it should not also prevent us from getting together to what is much more interesting.
Thank you very much, Saliou. All right, I don't know how many more minutes we have. Amdi?
Yes.
How many minutes do we have to wrap up? 10.
20.
20, okay. 20.
My half past.
Sorry?
My half past.
Okay, but all right. So we still have time. All right, so may I take another set of questions? Yes. Yes. A reaction from Gary. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to mention that the notion of continent is something we could understand from a Eurocentric viewpoint, because Africans did not, have that notion. So when great historian in the United States, like Dr. Bank, was asked about the real name of Africa, he's part of those who think that the name of Africa was, first, there was no name, and then after people started saying Akebulan, like some people say Akebulan, and so that notion, because the naming started actually with, like when you say Libya, or you say like ancient Egypt, that was Kemet. So most of the names we're using now are Eurocentric names. So that's also is very important. And that's why, I cite this him when he said that, the unnaming, that's what our leaders are trying to do now when we have, the new mayor of Ziguinchor, Ousmane Sonko, unnaming, streets. But, even though we all believe that that process goes beyond unnaming only. Yeah, we have also, to decolonize the mind. Yeah, like Buji Wachongo would say. So that's very important. Okay, thank you.
All right, so we are going to take another set of questions. Yes, Professor.
Before the second round of questions.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. I just would like to raise 2 points. The first one is for Dr. Rokhaya. Rokhaya, do you know the notion of immunity qualification? Have you heard that? Qualification? No. There was a federal law in 1967 that said that policemen could not be sued if they killed in the line of duty. And they called it immunity qualification. So the policemen are immunity qualified. And that federal law, maybe you should do some research on that and dig into that and see, the consequences of that immunity qualification, which is something very important. Federal law, 1967, a long time ago. I don't know whether they still use it, but the law exists. Okay?
Thank you so much, Professor. But it must be the same in Brazil, because I saw from some reports that in Brazil as well, it is the president himself who give immunity to police officers. Mm-hmm. Once they kill, they are not sued, yeah. They are not convicted.
Yeah.
So when will we get justice in that case?
Exactly.
Nobody will. They will just go on the killing spree.
Yep. Yep.
That's it.
And this is terrible. When I read that somewhere, I said I was horrified. This is horrible.
In the United States, you see even the toll numbers. For instance, the United States just said 1,000 unarmed black are killed every year.
Mm-hmm.
In Brazil, it's 1,800
Wow.
every year. Every year. So
Okay.
you see the high toll.
And the second thing is for Saliou. Yes, African American. You know this. I know that you guys are familiar with the sense of belonging. Yes, belonging is very powerful. Remember, in the 60s, 50s, black people used to be called niggers, Negroes. Okay, and they could not do anything about that. But later on, in the 80s or 90s, they said, we're not Negroes, we're not niggers. We are African American. So by saying African American, they brought the notion of belonging to the continent. And I really love that shift of paradigm from Negro, niggers to African American. All right? They are African, but at the same time they're American as well. We cannot call them totally African because they have some parts of their cultures that are not really African, okay? But, you know, they are American. Our sister there is American, but the sense of belonging makes her think that she belongs to the continent. And this is very powerful too. We should really praise them for that by accepting to be African Americans. Although, you know, we can think about what is blackness, what is being African, all that, but they made that move, and I commend them on that move. It's really powerful for me, this sense of belonging.
Okay. All right. Before I would like to, Dr. Souleymane Ndao is back online, and he would like to take the floor. Dr. Ndao, can you hear us? Okay, all right. We cannot hear from the loudspeakers, so.
Okay, yes, try this one, yes. Because I may have put up the loudspeaker.
Try to speak. Is it loud for everybody?
Yes. I would like just to thank all the presenters. Because today the topics that have been chosen are really interesting. And we have a meeting point for all of our topics today. It is addressing modern issues that Black community or colored people are facing nowadays. And as you may know, the main challenge today should be how to address issues, particularly in related to cyberspace and fictionality, but also movie or fiction production or representation of Black community. Such as the Oscar Soulmate movement is a movement that proposes a revisiting and rewriting of history events from another perspective, Black people's perspective, and not from the perspective of only cineasts that twisted the reality, the real reality. And as you may know, fiction production or motion arts and pictures have got a great impact on people's subconsciousness and how they represent minority groups also is really important. And today I think we should not leave that room for only people that decide how they're going to tell our story, how they're going to tell our story. So April Ray has just set up the most important stone, but it is the beginning. It is something that should be carried out by new generation of artists, authors, new generation of writers, new generation of intellectuals who should continue this movement in another field, in the field of literature, in the field of any other kind of production. This is all I wanted to add. The question that April Wright raised in her file, who tells the story behind the camera, is proposing a very neutral eye as far as movie production is concerned. She's not proposing the black perspective of storytelling, but a neutral. And that neutral, if this is the eye of the camera. So when I say eye, it is E-Y-E. So the eye of the camera should be neutral when it comes to represent people. That should be neutral and that should be real and right. And the SASA White movement set up the most important stone that should be perpetuated. And today, in this panel organized on behalf of Black History Month, I think you guys will really think about it in your coming publication and in your coming articles to address really modern day challenges that people of colors are facing in motion arts, pictures, in Hollywood production in general. It is drama or any other kind of movies. So thank you so much. This is all I have to say, and I would like to congratulate all the panelists from our sister Dr. Touré. Your presentation was wonderful. I was flowing from to Dr. Zale, and also our little brother Saliou. I would like really congratulate you on that, and I think that the topics that you have developed will be turned into articles very soon, because this is also a good thing to do. We need to turn it into articles very soon, or why not co-writing articles? I've seen very meeting.
Yes, we no longer have any sound from Souleymane Ndao. So, all right. So maybe I will take the last round of questions. Three. What's your name? Bakja. Yes. Raj. Okay. And poem. Okay, I will do the last one. Yes. Yeah, okay, all right. All right. So you want to flow now or after? Okay. Okay, yes. All right, so Bakja, you...
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, I want to thank Professor Mendy, who is my supervisor. I'm a PhD student, and for his great job he's been doing so far with us. Okay, and I thank you all, the panelists, for the relevant presentation you've given us. So my question is, don't you think that something must be done when it comes to African American educational system? Because when I hear you, lady, talking about some of you, some African American are not taught the history of African, of their past. They are not told the truth about Africa. So how can you move forward before without knowing your cultural root, what happened with your people, you know, your ancestors? So I think that you know, improvement is going on because some figures like Molfikete Asante and Amamazama has been creating some black studies in which, you know, they've been, you know, highlighting those facts of the African past, where they belong to, and then to move forward, you have to, you know, go back to the past in order to understand your future or where you're heading to. Okay, that's the question. I don't know if you get me.
Yes, yeah, okay. You understand your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I want to answer the question of Saliou when he was asking why we celebrating the Black History Month. Is it if we celebrating the Black History Month and we don't arrive to have a same common sense of knowing that Black, we are all same, so I don't think it's going to make sense, because we have to try to first of all come up with this concept of knowing that the Black brothers are the same. But if you are in America and you don't see yourself as a Black from Africa, and that's going to be very complicated. That's what I want to say.
Thank you very much, Alan. Alright, so yeah, I want to make a that is possible.
Okay. To the question of, like, I wasn't mentioning, excuse me, I wasn't referring to blackness. I was referring to the big picture, Africa. Not blackness, but Africa. When you say black, you know, you divide in people. You might say, you know, black in America, black this. And that's why those scholars I mentioned a while ago, those scholars, they consider themselves African in America. That's how they consider nowadays themselves. So Professor Mendy mentioned a very interesting point to the immunity, because history is very important. If you don't understand history, it's bound to repeat itself. So the 1967, that was just after the civil rights movement, right? So imagine, we had, right after the Civil War, we had Jim Crow laws. And then 100 years later, Martin Luther King was saying, you know, America gave you know, a blank, you know, check, you know, without provision to African Americans. So 100 years later, they, you know, protesting, marching, and then imagine just in 1967, 2 years after the Civil Rights Act, they broke that law. So it has a connection with the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which is giving the right to bear arms. That wasn't the right to bear arms to African Americans or to Indians, but that was for white men. So to neutralize whenever there would be uprising. And who owns guns? Not black people. So, you know, it's a cycle. It's a cycle. So, yeah, thank you. Maybe I think it's gonna be next Wednesday for the movie. Friday, yeah, to service law. Yeah, thank you. That was my point.
Friday or Monday?
Monday.
Yeah, Monday, next
Monday,
Monday.
yes.
Yeah. So maybe, you know, we'll have time, you know, to discuss it.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Salih. Before giving the floor to Dr. Touré and Saliou for the final remarks, so I'd like just to make a comment. I think that we are a little bit harsh on African Americans I think I understand my brother Dale when he talks about being African, being the bigger picture. But it's not that obvious for African Americans. You see, you said Africa is a continent, right? America is also a continent. Now we have to acknowledge the different histories of different people. Even though we are all of African descent, our histories are different. So we as Africans, we as Senegalese, since we were independent, we are living among our black brothers and sisters, right? So our history, we have a common history. We are living in a society where we are the majority right now, okay? Even though we still talk about neocolonialism, but we have not been through the Jim Crow laws. We have not been through those segregation, acts, etc. So when you say that, black people in the U.S. have to label themselves as Africans, I'm not sure about it. It depends. It depends on their sense of belonging. Okay, they feel like we are black brothers and sisters, but African, the notion of double consciousness, and I would like us to ask that question to Janai, if she might. Does or do black people in the U.S. still feel that sense of double consciousness at the same time being an African and being an American?
Yes, I think that. So we call it now. So it's interesting. There is definitely a sense of double consciousness. So someone before said like, "Oh, their culture is American." It's somewhat American because you can go to places where people, still speak languages that people spoke when they came over. You go to North Carolina, South Carolina. There are a lot of cultural similarities. We have it's actually three, right? There's the African culture that we came with. There's American culture that's imposed, and then there's what we created ourselves there. And so there's always different layers of what you have. On an everyday basis, we're not necessarily thinking too consciously or too deeply about that. But when you look at our music, our dance, our hair, my mom was like, she asked me the other day, "Can you bring me back some baskets?" And she was like, "Oh, never mind, because there are places in South Carolina where people need the same baskets that you find here." You understand what I'm saying? So there is that. The double consciousness is less, it's more when we enter communities that are not our own. So when I go to work, if I'm with my mother, I'm talking like this all the time. This is how I speak naturally, my family with my mother. I go to work, "Hey, how are you today?" That's the double consciousness.
Yes.
So it's like consistently figuring out, we call it code switching. Code switching.
Yeah.
So the more, and not every, so I use the term black. I'm going to use the term black. That's how I identify myself. For me, being black and being African are not exclusive. You can be black and be African, okay? Those of us who are raised more around black people do more of the changing. So if you have a black person who was raised in the suburbs, right, around more white people, they have the double consciousness, but they don't have to slide out of it as much. Because naturally they don't speak the way I speak or, other things like that. But for those of us who are raised around each other more, then there's that consistent shift.
All right. Okay, thank you very much, Jana, for answering that question. So I think it is very important for us to try to understand each other, what we have gone through, how we feel we belong, where we feel we belong, and try to understand each other, and not try to force people to identify themselves as being this or being that. I think is very important. So the bigger picture can be different depending on our perspectives. But our blackness is really what we do have in common, I think. So all right, so that's a comment I wanted to make. So maybe for wrapping up, yes.
Rokhaya first.
Rokhaya, yes.
So much.
Yes, you have. Because people agree with everything is shared.
And I have a question for you.
Which one is it? Go ahead.
Police brutality. You have black policemen and white policemen. Did you try to dig into that? Because we have violence black on black and white on blacks. Whites on blacks. All right. Do black policemen kill more black people, or do white men kill more black people?
Thanks so much for that question, but I have never said.
No, I mean, it's interesting to dig into that.
Yes. Yeah, for me, but that's really as plain as the nose on my face. That's white kill more blacks than black kill their brothers. Because most of these, anyway.
I'm talking about police.
Even the police, yeah, even the police. Even though they're all law enforcement officers, but most of the time it's white. And it is still has still racial undertones. Because those black whites are so, let's say, geared by their racist, let's say, educational racist background, that they are, let's say, impatient or they are very harsh on black. Even checking their identity, the first thing all black are taught when they are teenagers is once you are stopped by the police, raise your hand or put your hand at the steering wheel. That's the first thing. All the parents teach their children once they start driving. What does it mean? It means, and that you will never see that with a white community. So it just shows that they are more likely to be killed. If you make any gesture, whatever, and you say, okay, I'm just putting my hand in the glove compartment to take my ID. You say whatever, and you do it slowly, otherwise you'll be shot. Without even just working around, wearing a hood. A hood is just a t-shirt with a cap. Just wearing a hood, you might be shot there. That's racial profiling. Whenever they see a black, for them the black already is kind of a suspected drug dealer. Is a suspected gangster. So as long as you have those in mind, how can we remain the justice? I don't think that black police officers will kill them other blacks under those circumstances.
But they do.
They do, it happens, of course. I will never say that it does not happen, but the rate is really different. The rate the white men kill, and most of the time, maybe if a black kills another black, he might be prosecuted. Yes. But if a white kills a black, he will never be prosecuted. Most of the time, he's found not guilty.
And how if a black kills a black? Are you gonna call it racism?
No, that's different. That's another piece of cake. Yeah, because that's within the community. That's the violence within the community. But we're talking about the racial profiling and how police tend to be more, let's say, stringent, harsher on blacks rather than white. Just identity check. Have you seen any white officers doing identity check on another white, pointing his gun at him, or just laying him down on the ground, putting him on the ground, putting his knees on the neck, or as they did with George Floyd? We have never seen that with a white doing that with a white. So that's the issue.
The statistics would be interesting.
Yes, statistics, but the problem is the statistics. You may find any statistics on any field except racial, those black murders. Because most of these figures, they got it from associations or obituaries, the families, and it's the association who compile those figures and get an estimate of the number. But you will never see an official institutional agency which will record all the deaths of black people. Whereas if it is weighing any other data you need in the country, you may get it. But if it is a number of black people killed, you will never get any official figure. And that is still part of the system.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Touré. All right. Okay, what last comment shortly?
Yes, shortly. About the identity. Me, I never see the black American as an African. For me, it's an American because they born in America and they adopt the culture. Why we should call them African American? That's the point. The second point, when I heard the explanation of the minister, maybe they need now because they feel they did not belong to white and no Africa. That's why they try to find an identity to call themselves black American. But for me, there's no sense to call them African. They are American. They belong to that country. Why we should bring that issue of?
But the roots are here.
Okay, one very last comment by Janai.
I'm gonna disagree.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
No, but it's, so again, if you don't actually like study, so there's truth to that and then there's not truth. Because American is nationality, it's not necessarily culture. If you move today, right, to America and you have a child there in America, your child is gonna grow culturally Senegalese, right? So there are still very easily identifiable parts of culture that have passed down. I was talking with Marianne the other day when I told her I live in a house, my adult brother, his wife, my adult sister, and all their children, we live together. And she said, oh, that's like Senegal. I didn't know that American people live like that. White American people don't live like that. A lot of black American people still live with their extended family, familiarly. All my friends that I've had for a long time, the same way I came here, someone told me, oh, that's not aunt, that's not aunt, that's not. Everyone in America, that's our cousin. So there are still lots of cultural similarities. You can't just say, oh, they're just solely American. That's why people use the term black or this or that, because it does give a definition. And it's not like there's what you agree with and then there's like tangible facts. You can pick up a ton of books, a tons of this, a tons of that, and make the same comparison that you do in different parts of culture across spaces. So yeah, we are American, yes, unfortunately, not my choice necessarily, but there are still parts of African, specifically West African culture, that are deeply seated. If you go to North Carolina right now, South Carolina, right now, there's communities that you know about, Balangichi communities, who still literally speak languages that, all of the rest of us have lost, right? But those things are still there. So it did come from here, foundational black American, right? But we know where it came from, so that's
She specializes in public health.
Yeah. But even if you look at public health, right? So, well, okay.
Very interesting, but we have to manage time. They have to go back home very fast. Okay, Saliou, we have 2 minutes. Not more than 2 minutes.
Yeah, and then you conclude with this.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Very quick, maybe just 1 minute. The question related to education asked by my brother Bob. I think, of course, we should educate ourselves. African Americans or Africans. That's very easy to say. African Americans should be very educated, toward history. But how about African? That's interesting. So I was reading a book of written on the fugitive pedagogy of Rokhaya Touré. Very much interesting. And I think, this work of this deconstruction, to quote Dr. Zale, is very much interesting in US, within African American community. How about African communities? This work of this deconstruction also. I think it is very interesting to educate ourselves on both sides, not just to say, hey, you should change narrative, and how about us? This laziness that we portray in African American, just because we're watching it on movies or TV shows, and we just think that, hey, they are lazy, they don't want to. No, we should also change that. The last comment will be maybe a word, Sabali. There is a soundtrack of Nas and Damian Marley, which is called Sabali, which means patience. Let us be patient. 400 years of slavery, more than 50 years of colonization as far as West African countries are concerned. You cannot just wake up in 20 years, 30 years and change everything. Let us be patient. Let us work, but let us be patient. That's very much interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Saliou. Be patient and trust the process, right? All right. So I think we are going to wrap up by thanking everyone, each and everyone, especially the presenters, Dr. Rokhaya Touré, and Saliou Diop, and also Dr. Souleymane Ndao, who could not be here in person today.